Jungkook looked at Ryan softly and smiled. He said coldly at the fact of Ryan's boyfriend who always treated her badly. She sighed, ran a hand through her hair. She stated firmly but sadly she really did love him as much as she could. But Jungkook was right about this man. The way he was treating her made her feel so uncomfortable. He explained, trying to be logical and mature despite being so young. It seemed to work. She defended her boyfriend. He asked, feeling a bit bad about the situation now that he understood why he was getting so upset. He was just so protective over Ryan. She shook her head, making him frown. She told him honestly. Jungkook nodded understandingly and then gave her a sad smile. She suggested taking off towards the window while walking slowly and clearly. Jungkook followed her curiously. He watched her take slow deep breath and feel sorry when she turned around to face him again. Her cheeks were flushed red and her eyes shone. He asked softly, worried now by how she pale suddenly become. Jungkook noticed a faint shimmer in her eyes and his heart broke a little as he realized she was holding back tears. He walked closer to her and hesitantly wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He didn't have any clue what had caused her to look like this. She usually looked so happy and cheerful. She sniffled quietly and then continued when she saw Jungkook looking at her questioningly. He pulled her into a hug and rubbed her back gently. His eyes were in rage and hatred, which he was holding for Ryan's boyfriend Han Soo-hoo. Ryan entered her apartment again with a heavy heart. She frowned when the lights were out and Soo-hoo was sitting on the couch. He smirked at her and looked at her with his dark gaze. Her voice cracked with emotion and she took a few steps towards the kitchen, trying to get rid of him, but was stopped by a strong arm grabbing her wrist from behind. She struggled against his grip weakly. He demanded, squeezing her wrist harder and causing more pain. She shouted hopelessly, but his grip wouldn't let go of her wrist. She begged, tears started filling her eyes. She wanted nothing more than to scream and fight and push Suhu's face, but she wasn't a fighter. He whispered dangerously in her ear. It scared her. She couldn't do anything against him. She shrieked loudly. She screamed, trying to free herself from his iron grip. He spat as he yawned her to him by her wrist forcefully. His other hand landed on her cheek roughly. He yelled, coming into view before Suhu could manage. Jungkook punched him harder enough that he stumbled backwards. she murmured. Jungkook started punching him again until his face controlled with pain. And then he pushed him to the floor violently. Jungkook stood above him with fury written all over his face. He was breathing heavily and still growling down at him. Suho looked up at him, pelting. Jungkook didn't answer him and kept glaring. He then kicked the male in his stomach, causing him to cough and spit up blood. He looked at Jungkook, fear evident in his eyes. He sat and held Vian's hand before leaving the place. As he left, his men took him with them. Jungkook made Vian sit on the bed and headed to grab first aid kit from the bathroom closet. While he grabbed it, he heard Vian crying quietly from across the room. She called, her voice trembling. He turned back to see her hugging herself rockingly slightly where she sat on the bed. Jungkook went over her and kneeled in front of her. She raised her head and started blinkly at him, avoiding eye contact. He cupped her face with both hands carefully and wiped her tears away with his thumbs. He kissed her forehead gently before pulling back to look at her face. He sat and made her sit properly so he could treat her wounds. She asked her why the small and fragile. He said seriously, but he knew that she understood the meaning behind it. He demanded he couldn't stand that someone could hurt her so horribly. Someone as precious as Vian should have been protected. She replied, looking down with tears welling up in her eyes. He sat still looking down, treating her wounds. He then looked up when he finished last bandage that covered her wound. He sat smiling warmly at her, but she didn't return the gesture. She just hugged him tightly and started sobbing. She admitted between sobs. Jungkook didn't reply. He just caressed her back soothingly. After a while, she pulled apart. She nodded her head and pulled away. She paused for a second and Jungkook could see the pain in her eyes. He put his finger under her chin and lifted her head to face him. She smiled through her tears, feeling really grateful and thankful that he always protected her. She rested her head in the crook of his neck and sighed tightly, still emotionally drained from everything. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep completely safe in his arms.